Welcome to episode 335 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Lily Howard Scott about the power of teacher language and self-talk. Visit truthforteachers.com for an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. Today's episode is brought to you in part by ListenWise, providing short, high-quality, age-appropriate podcasts for grades 2 to 12. Save time with pre-made lessons designed to build students' background knowledge and academic vocabulary. Keep students on grade level with scaffolding and differentiation. Use ListenWise's ELD lesson library for WIDA and state ELD standards-aligned podcast and video lessons built for English learners, from emergent to reclassification. ListenWise gives you comprehension tools like quizzes, interactive transcripts, graphic organizers, and a text-to-speech toolbar with translations in over 15 languages. Start a free trial today at listenwise.com. This episode is also brought to you by a podcast that I think more educators and families really need to hear. It's called Opportunity Gap, and it's one of those shows that fills in the missing pieces that we don't always get from formal professional development or teacher prep. The host, Julian Saavedra, is an assistant principal in Philadelphia with nearly 20 years in public schools. He brings both lived experience and a deep sense of empathy to every conversation, whether it's with child psychologists, parents, or educators in the field. You'll find episodes on everything from the gaps in federal funding for special ed to how dyslexia often gets missed in students of color. It's a great resource for teachers and also one you can recommend to families. To listen, just search Opportunity Gap in your podcast app. That's Opportunity Gap. My guest today is Lily Howard Scott. She is an NYC-based parent, educator, and author who helps teachers and school leaders create classroom communities where kids feel known, valued, and ready to learn. She's a former third grade teacher with nearly a decade in the classroom, and Lily now supports educators and parents nationwide through workshops, coaching, and writing. She is a regular conference presenter, has been published in the Washington Post, and is the author of the new book, The Words That Shape Us: The Science-Based Power of Teacher Language. Throughout this episode, you'll hear me talk about some of my favorite parts of the book and some pieces that I think will be really practical and usable for you. Listen in. So, Lily, we're in a time where classroom culture feels more complex than ever. When you use the phrase teacher language, what exactly do you mean, and why do you believe that language is such a vital tool for teachers right now?
So when I say teacher language, I suppose what I mean is the way we talk to kids and the way we talk about kids when they can hear us. You know, many people have said something along the lines of the way trusted grown-ups talk to kids becomes the way that they talk to themselves. And I think elementary school teachers and teachers of young children, early childhood teachers, they spend so much time with the kiddos in their care. And the kids, the kids in their classroom are surrounded by so much language, right? Teacher language, peer language. And some really exciting recent research by Lisa Feldman Barrett, a neuroscientist at Harvard and Northeastern, reveals that the words and phrases kids have access to can actually sort of shape their brains on a cellular level, invite them to create new mental concepts, shift how their brains predict, which transforms how they think and how they feel. And so, well, I think any teacher would probably say, yeah, I hope my words matter. In light of this recent research, and in light of the fact that we know kiddos' anxiety rates are skyrocketing and perfectionist tendencies, I think it's really hopeful and optimistic to realize that the words we share with kids can matter a whole lot more than we even realized.
That's such a nice framing, because often we're looking at like how many problems there are in education, how many problems there are in society that kids are bringing. And this idea that it's not just words, well, I can talk to them, I can listen to them, but that I can't really do anything else. To think about how powerful our words are is super important.
Yeah, and that it's just this practical tool we all have, right? Like right on the tip of our tongues. It's the thing we bring with us every single day, and to realize that that it may carry, or rather that it can trigger a beautiful and tectonic shift in the way that kids see themselves and navigate challenges. We may not see that shift right in the moment, but knowing that that possibility is there, I think can be really buoying to
Yeah.
teachers or really to any caregiver.
Yeah, it is. And that's how I felt when I was reading your book. Your book is called The Words That Shape Us. And it was such a positive read because you do such a nice job weaving in the stories with the practical tips of what to do and the examples of things to say. So I'm going to go through a couple different examples with you that really stuck out to me and have you talk about them more. And one thing that you address in the book is how the language that teachers use internally shapes our perception of students and ourselves. And I'm really big on self talk, understanding our self talk, being conscious of our self talk. I know it looks different for different people. Not everyone has that inner monologue in their brain, but the way that we speak to ourselves and the way that we narrate our circumstances and speak about our students really impacts a lot. So tell me what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, what a beautiful question, and thank you for picking up on this. Perhaps I should have mentioned it earlier to clarify. Like, yes, the book is about helping kids express themselves more clearly, but that's sort of maybe 30% of it. 60% is about just the way that language can nestle within all of us and transform the way that we speak to ourselves, right? Whether you're a teacher or a kiddo. And so I think one of my biggest hopes for the book is just normalizing this idea that all of our brains, teacher brains, student brains, all of our brains are cacophonous places. Like all of us, just because we are alive with a nervous system, all of us, encounter many thoughts and feelings that many of which are useful to us and rooted in truth, and many of which simply aren't, as our brains scan for threats, right? And as we try to make sense of our surrounding. And when teachers normalize for kids and for themselves, our brains can be these busy, busy places, but we have more agency than we might think. I like to call it like an inner voice, which is the sort of truest, wisest part of you. Some kids like to call it a wisest self. My third grade student called it her president decider, kind of like the leader of her brain. That giving kids language and yourself language to wrap around the idea that we have this inner leader that is our most us part of us, our kindest, best self. I think you've called it like your inner compass. I read a beautiful essay you wrote. Helps teachers, lean into the fact that just because they feel this pressure, right, from an administrator or a parent, doesn't mean you always have to listen to it. Your president decider or inner voice can push back, or for a kid, just because that sort of wave of nauseousness might visit them before a math test, that may not actually mean they're unprepared. That their inner voice, their wisest self, can kind of gently speak back, and giving kids and yourself words to wrap around that inner agency to lean into really loving self-talk is, I'd say, probably my primary goal with
Mhm.
this book.
Yeah, it's such a nice mix because what you're saying inside comes out, and that's the piece that I think a lot of folks don't realize is, there's that saying that, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But if you've been thinking things that are unkind, that are judgmental, that are not compassionate, it will come out either in your words, in your demeanor, in your tone. Your self talk
Yeah.
really makes a big difference in how you treat people inadvertently, and also just in how much enjoyment you're getting from your day. I think there's so much reframing that we can do mentally just to get more joy from our interactions with others rather than telling ourselves these stories that just aren't
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, it really, the minds can be full of trickery, right? It's sort of helpful, I think, and comforting to remember that and to lean into that kind of agency. And it's funny, often we think on our most stressed out days, or perhaps a child who obviously struggles, they need self-talk the most, or those are moments when we need positive self-talk the most. But I remember having this encounter with with my student Harper, who developed that phrase, president decider. She was this like high flying, extraordinarily high achieving kiddo, right? Very charismatic. I was telling myself a story about her. She moves through her days with ease. Like her inner life must be hunky dory. And she wrote this poem between president decider and the pressure she feels to always raise her hand first, to always show that she cares, to always sort of achieve in a glittering way. And it was a reminder to me that like everybody needs positive self-talk on our hard days, on our easy days, kids who obviously struggle, kids who don't. And that's something I always try to remember when I encounter a student who sort of seems like they're doing great, that everybody really benefits from learning to talk to themselves with love. And of course, dysregulated anxiety often just comes across as a quote unquote behavior issue, right? And then regulated anxiety just masquerades as very high achievement. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, that's a whole rabbit trail we can go down because that's an interesting topic.
I can go down any rabbit hole with you, Angela.
Let's talk about some specific examples of teacher language that can be useful. In your book, you introduce the idea of outer shells and inner swirls. And this is a tool for noticing and interrupting assumptions. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I love what George Saunders says about this. He's a wonderful novelist. He says, we're all flawed thinking machines, and we're walking around our days just telling, incorrect stories about one another. And that really struck me, how funny it is that we look at somebody's outer shell, their sort of representative self, and we think, I know exactly what's going on with you. You're not trying hard enough, or you think you're X, Y, and Z. But the truth is their inner swirls, right? The part of that person we can't see, their inner life is always going to be a mystery to us. And sometimes it sort of closely aligns with their outer shell, right? Sometimes there's alignment there, but often there isn't. And so when we give kids, or grownups for that matter, really clear words to wrap around this previously amorphous idea that our outsides don't always match our insides, and that to really understand somebody, it might take some more investigating or thoughtful question asking, I think can feel like such a relief to kids, because comparison is so painful, particularly in the age of social media, where we see so many shiny outer shells, but those inner swirls are really hidden. And so maybe first, when just talking about characters, kiddos can make these maps of the character's outer shell, and then sort of draw or write about their inner swirls. Or I remember my student Alexis said, just because people look calm before the assessment, they had to take some terrible state tests, doesn't mean they are. Their outer shell may not just be matching their inner swirls. Mm-hmm. And that language also gives kids a really clear way to communicate about themselves, because they certainly know the stories that others are telling about them. And when they say, okay, well, just because my outer shell looks this way doesn't mean that this isn't happening in my inner swirls. I remember a student saying, just because I'm quiet on the rug doesn't mean I don't have ideas going on inside. My inner swirls are overflowing with them. That language can just help kids more clearly share about their identities with one another and help their peers interrupt those assumptions. So, I find that language useful in terms of literacy learning, but also just interpersonally as well.
Mm-hmm. I can see referencing that all throughout the school year, like introducing that at some point, and not just at the beginning of the year. I always like to clarify that this is not first month of school stuff. This is all year long stuff. If you happen to be listening to this episode and it's like February, do it in February. The kids will still need it in February. I promise you that. Even in June, they will still need it.
Yeah. I still need it every day when I catch myself being a flawed thinking machine, telling an incorrect story about somebody I know, just reminding myself, I can't actually see their inner swirls.
Yes. And then you can come back to that. And then when you have those moments like that student you had who said, she was quiet on the rug, her outer shell was quiet, but inside she had a lot of thinking. Like I could see that coming back. And in the book, you have some examples of student work, and I'll put an image into the blog post if that's okay with you. Yeah. So that people can see that. And it's just like a drawing of a person, and the kids write what's going on their outer shell. And then they write words about what's happening on the inner shell, what's inside of them. And it was really interesting to see what kids put there.
Totally. And I so appreciate you mentioning that, Angela, because as a third grade teacher, I just longed for resources that were practical. And that's what
Yeah.
I hope to do with this book. So at the
Yeah.
back, there are all sorts of templates like this that you can just, leave out for kiddos as options or send
Yeah.
home for homework. Of course, you could do it about a character as well or a historical figure. I've seen some interesting Alexander Hamilton outer shell inner swirls maps. It's sort of a more creative ways for kids to try to understand anybody, really.
Yeah.
Um, and it's something you could just weave, really into any aspect of the curricula.
Have you seen this done at the secondary level?
I have actually. And I find that it's really important to, at the secondary level, make sure that as the teacher, well, this is always important, but most important with older kids who can be more paralyzed by self consciousness than,
Mhm.
a fearless 7-year-old, to really model that vulnerability yourself under a document camera, to do what Parker Palmer says. It's never unprofessional, but like the most powerful tool you have as a teacher is your own selfhood. Are you willing to make it available in the service of learning? And sharing my own outer shell inner swirls map. And again, not going all the way into the deep, dark stuff, but telling the truth about things that I might worry about sometimes or an insecurity that visits me. It's really critical to model that so that older students know they can create their maps as lightly or as deeply as they want, but that you've normalized that emotional availability, I feel like is really important. I
Mhm.
also give those older kids always, I find that when they're sharing in small groups, that feels safer to them. Whereas many 6-year-olds are clamoring to share their outer shell inner swirls map under the projector in front of everybody, right? Um, 16-year-olds are a whole different kind of species. They're very preoccupied with social belonging, as they should be. We're all sort of big baboons, right? And
Yeah.
that means that risk taking can feel a little harder.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have the outer shells and inner swirls. Another thing from the book that I really loved is the way that you talk about feelings with students and you introduce them as visitors so that students understand they are separate from their feelings. This feeling is a visitor. This anger is visiting me. The sadness is visiting me. Even joy, happiness, contentment, these are all passing. They're visitors. And so once you understand that your feelings are visitors, then you can watch and observe your feelings and your thoughts. Can you say more about that and how you teach
Yeah,
that?
definitely. Well, this visitor language is not my own. I've got to give credit to the great Rumi. His beautiful poem, "The Guest
Oh,
House." This being human is a guest house, every day a new arrival, right? An unexpected visitor, and I just love that poem so much. And with older kids, you might share that poem, right?
yeah.
But with younger kids, just this idea of, have you ever felt, this huge swell of frustration? You feel it in the tips of your fingers. It's like this gauzy, almost as if an alien has inhabited your body. Well, guess what? It can feel that way, but we're actually separate from our feelings, right? That big feeling is a visitor, and it might seem impossible that it'll ever go away, but it will. So in our class, we are gonna call feelings visitors. Maybe you have like a feeling visitor kind of word bank, or even in read alouds, you're mentioning that the feelings are visitors, helping kids develop emotional granularity while understanding the impermanence of feelings, like just a subtle shift like that. Then when a kiddo feels deeply angry or a wave of inadequacy sweeps over them, that reminder back to that self-talk of, oh, this feeling is visiting me, but it's not who I am, is so important to remember. I think it's back to that idea of inner agency. And it's funny, like we all want to give kids agency, but the truth is, just being a kid means you don't have much agency. Like I try to
Mm.
give my kids agency. They're 6 and 3, but like they have to take a bath. They have to wear their coats in the winter. In any school, we're saying line up for music, sit down. It's lunchtime. Open your book to this page. That we tell what we tell kiddos what to do all day long. I think it can feel really radical to them that they simply because they don't have that much outer agency, that they do have inner agency. I think often what looks like quote unquote misbehavior is so often rooted in a kid not realizing that they have more agency than they realize within. Like when they have that big swell of an impulse to bop somebody over the head, with their recorder, it just feels like that's just one more thing happening to me today, and there's nothing I can do about it. And this language of feelings are visitors just helps empower that kid with a little more agency.
Mhm. How do you teach kids to watch and observe their thoughts?
Well, I find it really helpful to model it myself. Back to that idea of Parker Palmer, your own selfhood is so important. I might share, if we are experiencing something together, maybe on a field trip, looking at a snow leopard at the zoo, or I remember once a red-tailed hawk came and landed on a branch right outside my classroom. Whatever it is, if we're having a shared moment, I might just say out loud, "Oh my goodness, a jolt of joy is visiting me, and also a little bit of worry is visiting me. Is it going to fly away in a moment? Or I've read X, Y, and Z about the red-tailed hawk declining population. That thought is visiting me." That the more I model it, the easier it is for kiddos to do so. And also, sometimes kids can inhabit a character in a read aloud that can feel really safe, and just narrate out loud the feeling visitors that might be popping up in that character's brain. And that can feel like an easy way to exercise that muscle of slowing down and naming thoughts and visitors, but it's not quite so personal. And then once you've done that enough, it's easier to turn the mirror on yourself.
Mm-hmm. I also want to talk about your parts in the book where you're talking about teaching students that they are always good inside, even when they make a bad choice. And I am so delighted to see this in an education book, because I really want to see this belief, this worldview, this way of perceiving kids and humanity and ourselves
Yeah.
take hold and become a more dominant narrative, because I have held other worldviews, and this is by far the most helpful. This is the worldview that helps me be the most patient, the most empathetic, and the most kind to myself and others. So to believe that we are good inside. We make bad choices. We have coping mechanisms that are not healthy. We have traumas, and we could be triggered and reactive,
Yeah.
but we're still good inside. And I can't remember where I first heard about it, but I know one of the people who's popularized that is Dr. Becky Kennedy and her Good Inside framework. And I have talked about that before in the podcast, about how that has been a big internal shift for me over recent years. But I would love to hear your thinking on the concept and what you have experienced with this whole good inside, bad choices when you're introducing that to students.
Well, I'd love to share about that, but if you don't mind my asking, when did you first lean into this idea? And was it a departure from another sort of previously held different way of thinking about kiddos or people or yourself?
It was during my deconstruction period, because I was raised in a pretty extreme version of fundamentalist Christianity, in which we are all sinful from birth. Even babies are sinful. And so you have to sort of crush their spirit. You have to teach them to obey. Your own instincts are not to be trusted. They are evil. So I had a lot of unpacking to do over the years. And I just became so much more gentle with myself and with others when I started thinking that, like, no, I feel like in my heart, I am a good person, and people around me are good, even people who do really, really bad things. I just don't choose to see them as inherently bad and in need of fixing, more so of like needing to let go of all of this other baggage that they've accumulated that is keeping them from showing up as their highest self, or with that wisest self in charge.
Yeah. Wow, what a beautiful shift, Angela, and what a testament to you that you were able to make that shift and land in such a beautiful place. Anyway, I feel like now that's all I want to talk about. We can.
Thank you. Go ahead, let's camp here for a while.
Yeah. Well, I also am very grateful to Dr. Becky Kennedy for popularizing that language. I feel that now parents have really internalized that language, and it helps them show up for their kids really differently.
Yep.
I have to credit, though, Dr. Ross Green, who is the person who first introduced this idea to me. His extraordinary book, Lost at School. And what he says transformed the way I think about kids, myself, and other people, sort of like you, Angela. What he says is kids do well if they can. And that doesn't knock you off your chair till you consider the alternative, I would argue, misguided way of thinking about kids that's much more popular, which is kids do well if they want to. So kids do well if they want to is, oh, that kid could do well. They're just not trying hard enough. I need to motivate that kid, with a sticker or whatever, or a prize, or I need to shame that kid, or I need to punish that kid. But what Dr. Ross Green says is every kid, for the most part, and every person for the most part, is doing the best they can in the circumstances that they find themselves with the tools and the resources that are available to them. So if a kid is not doing well, it doesn't mean they're not good. It doesn't mean that they're not trying. It doesn't mean that there's this inherent sort of flaw within them we need to shame out of them or bribe out of them. It means that they have a lagging skill or an unmet need or an unsolved problem. And I remember that shift being transformative for me. As a young teacher at 23, I was given this yardstick when I was teaching in Brooklyn, and every first grader's kid had to be on the green at the top of the yardstick. And then there was like a yellow section and an orange section. And when a kid made a mistake, I was expected to, in front of everybody, move their down, right?
Yeah.
So that's the ultimate kids do well if they want to approach, that you could do well, you're just not trying hard enough. So let me shame you. Of course, what am I doing when I do that? I'm shutting down the kid's cortex. I'm activating their amygdala. Then the kid can't even learn. And it's a whole host of horrible things. And I remember I only lasted at that school for 1 year, but I learned a lot from that experience, transitioning to the sort of polar opposite way of thinking. No, every kid is inherently good. And if they're not doing well, something is hard for them. How can I help them? What skill can I help coach them to learn? Or what tool can I give them? And so I like to say to kids, every single one of you is good inside, and every single one of you will struggle at some point this year. And I'm good inside, and I'll struggle at some point this year. And when I struggle, or when you struggle, it might come out as using a tone we regret, or saying something we wish we didn't, or doing something that we wish we didn't. And I just want you to know that you're always separate from that moment, from that choice. Your goodness can never go away. And sometimes when we hold on to always seeing and believing in our inherent goodness, it's just easier to make better choices. It's easier to be gentler on ourselves and be more open to the tools that'll help us do better. So Ross Green has this lagging skills inventory I sometimes adapt for kids. I call it a hard thing inventory. And it's like, what are some of our hard things? Do we struggle with transitions? Do we struggle to understand somebody else's perspective? Do we struggle with executive functioning? And of course, I'll check off all the things that are my hard things. And then the kiddos will take a stab at that too. And what that does, kind of like feeling visitors, is it creates this distance between the hard thing and the kid's goodness. And then it's just a lot easier to kind of see that hard thing, name that hard thing, and do better. And, it's very moving. I've worked with pre-K students who will hear a fellow classmate say, that person is a bully. And when their teacher has used this language over and over again in read-alouds and the way they talk about their students, that pre-K student will say, no, he's not a bully. He just made a bad choice. Or the other day, a group of students were listening to that Taylor Swift song, Miss Americana. There's some lyric like, they whisper in the hallway, she's a bad, bad girl. And like 3 of them at the same time said, nobody's bad. Nobody's bad. They just make bad choices. I was like, oh Lord, we've created monsters here. We can't even stop music. But in a way, I found that to be so moving, that they were so alert to that generalized language and so eager to try to replace it with something more compassionate.
For many years, I did prison ministry through my church. And I worked with always women's prisons and then eventually into juvenile facilities. And all of them were good people. They were all good people. And I just feel like I should share that because I know not everyone has this worldview. I know there are people who have been really hurt by other people. And like, there is no way that is a good person. Like, I can't even listen to this. This is like making me so angry right now. It's creating like really big feelings. And I want to acknowledge that. I mean, I think that's valid for people to hear that. And so I'll give you a chance to address that. And also I want to just share a little bit of my experience with that. Is like, inside what I saw were people who would have done better if they could. It wasn't that they didn't want to. They would have done better if they could. And what they seemed to need more than anything else was someone to speak to that goodness inside. Someone to actually believe that they could do better, to believe that they were worth something more, that there was real potential inside of them. And I think about the same with my students. Like, I literally cannot think of any like bad students. I had students with like really, really difficult behavior who made some very, very harmful and detrimental choices. I never taught a bad student. I really did not
Yeah.
see them that way. And that was even before I deconstructed from my faith, which is why deconstructing was so helpful for me, because I realized that I really didn't see humans in this way. And I found it so powerful to speak to the identity in young people, both those who were incarcerated and also in my classroom, to speak to that part of them, that higher, wisest self that, like, I know who you are. I can see who you are. I can see
Yeah.
the goodness inside of you. I can see your talents and your skills, your intellect, the gifts you have. I can see all of this amazing stuff inside of you. And I think that when humans in general and young people in particular see that about themselves, they want to step into it more, because they
Absolutely.
realize that these bad choices are actually not incongruent. So many kids think, I have done this behavior so many times, it's such a pattern for me, this is who I am. And when you say,
Yep.
actually, you're a great kid, you're a good
Yeah.
kid, and I really genuinely like you. A lot of them have never heard that if they have a lot of behavior problems. They've never heard an adult
Completely.
truly, truly like them as a person. And when they feel liked and they feel seen and they feel like they are good inside, it makes them behave differently because they see themselves differently. And it is the most powerful thing that I think I've ever experienced in my relationships with other people, is really making that shift consciously to believe that people are good inside.
Completely. I mean, there's so much you shared I want to touch upon, but
It's a
starting
lot.
in the classroom sort of context, I mean, many have said, I am as I am seen. But another way of thinking about that is just, I am as I hear you talk about me, if you're a young student.
Mm.
And so you're right. You know, if a kid constantly hears, you're rude, you're unsafe, you're wiggly, well, then I am as I am seen. What can I do about it? I think there is something so powerful. If you just imagine a kindergartner, let's say it's a low stakes thing, and the kindergartner just elbows another kindergartner. And the teacher could say two things. The teacher could say, hey, you're unsafe, back of the line. Or the teacher could say, you're always good inside. That wasn't a good or safe choice. Let's practice using our words. That if in the first instance of struggling, that child is reminded of their goodness, let's say they go to a music class, whatever, at the end of the day, and they again hurt another student. And maybe that music teacher, understandably, is at the end of her rope and she screams at the kid and the kid has to go take a break. The teacher's language from the first moment, the first instance, may nestle within that kid's inner life, and that kid may repeat it to themselves. Well, okay, my teacher did say I'm good, even when I don't make good choices. That even if the kid isn't hearing it in a 360 degree way, you know, even if they're still hearing negative language from other exasperated adults in their life who in their own way are doing the best they can in any given circumstance, I think we cannot underestimate the power of hearing it from somebody and like letting go of the myth that you're going to say it and then suddenly see change. You know, in 4 years, that child may return to your words about inherent goodness and repeat it to themselves. Do you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
I just think words lurk within us and pop up in all sorts of surprising ways. And and you know, teachers have this tremendous power in the words that they share with their students. And then to your other point about visiting women who have been incarcerated, it's really interesting. I recently finished a book by Robert Sapolsky, a neuroscientist and primatologist, called Determined. And
Mm.
his view is a little bit extreme, but he is he's a fantastic thinker. He also wrote a great book called Behave. And basically what he says is this: when children experience severe trauma, um, they develop an overactive amygdala, and their prefrontal cortex, that functioning is inhibited. And what does your prefrontal cortex do? It helps you do the hard thing, but the right thing. It helps you not punch your irritating coworker, right? And so what he argues is that it's some crazy statistic, like 92% of people who commit violent crimes had significant childhood adversity, that
Mhm.
in a way, their brains actually, there's just such a disadvantage from the get-go. You know, that kids who receive enough food, enough care, consistent, responsive love from the grown-ups around them are able to have far better impulse control. And what is crime if not really, really, really poor impulse control? And so what he argues is locking somebody up forever and saying, well, this was your choice. There's a bit of a paradox there, because for many people who commit violent crimes, in a way, it wasn't, we are ascribing free will to something that is actually a bit murkier than that. If we're dealing with, prefrontal cortex that's really inhibited and an overactive amygdala. And he's not saying there shouldn't be a way to keep, others safe, et cetera. He's more just trying to raise the question. It's funny that we do this, that we tell this story of free will when that isn't fully the case, right? We have this self-fulfilling prophecy of kids who are able to receive responsive, loving care. For the most part, it's much more rare that they end up incarcerated, right? Everything kind of goes back to childhood in ways that are beautiful and in ways that are deeply, deeply sad.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you talk so much about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, because I just finished creating my curriculum line called Finding Flow Solutions. It's designed to teach kids how to manage their time, energy, and attention. And with the youngest kids, with the K2 learners, we talk about that. We have your wise owl, who is your prefrontal cortex, and your barking guard dog is your amygdala. And sometimes that overactive guard dog is trying to keep you safe. It's barking because it's fearful and it sees something as a potential threat. And your wise owl gets scared and flies away because your barking guard dog is scaring it. And I think it's really powerful to teach kids this about your brain, that like so much they think is, like you said, you think it's your willpower, it's your self-discipline. Are you lazy? Are you willing to put an effort? Maybe you haven't been taught morals. It's a parental failing. It's whatever. There's all kinds of things we attribute to it. But in some ways, it really is as simple as brain science. You had something happen that made your brain fearful. It triggered something in your nervous system. Your amygdala overreacted. The rest of your brain shut down, and you made a bad choice from your amygdala. And I find that such a helpful framing to help kids separate what they do from who they are, and to realize that the brain is, like you said, things are just much more complex than that. And it's complex in a way that I think is very grounding and very healing, because we're taking away the stigma, the shame, and the guilt, because shame and guilt are just not good motivators for most people most of the time.
Completely. First of all, I love the wise owl language. Like that could be just another way to describe your wisest self, right? Or your inner voice, or your president decider. And what a gift to introduce this to somebody who's 9, right? Whose capacity for neuroplasticity is so remarkable, who's developing thinking patterns that will stay with her for the rest of her life. Like, in a way, I laugh. Why do we all learn this stuff when we're 42? As we try to make sense of the past 4 decades.
Right.
We can introduce it to kiddos now and weave it right into literacy instruction, and empower that kid with a metacognition that, this is actually totally normal. I am separate from that thought that makes me want to do X, Y, and Z. Or, that's not who I am. What would my wise owl say? That, in a way, particularly in this unprecedented moment where AI is about to shift everything, what is school if not a place where we can teach kiddos to be more functional, compassionate, inner and intrapersonally intelligent humans, given how much else is going to go out the window? It feels like there's a real opportunity to just give kids this language early, and anybody can share this language with kiddos. Any teacher. It takes about 2 minutes, and sometimes it's the smallest choice in the sort of implicit curriculum, not the explicit curriculum, but that small choice in the implicit curriculum that can actually trigger the greatest shift for that kiddo.
Let's talk more about this wisest self, because this is another concept that I don't think I have seen in another education book. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like I have read it in lots of personal development types of spaces and on those types of podcasts, but I'm not really hearing it shared with teachers. I think it's super powerful, is helping teachers teach students to ask, what can your wisest self say back to the other thoughts and feelings that are visiting? it's so powerful because it's a way of teaching students to go beyond just observing the thoughts and feelings, but actually being able to direct and choose which visitors they want to stay, which feeling visitors
Yeah.
and thoughts they want to focus on. So say more about the wisest self and how that works.
Yeah, it's funny. I had not actually heard of Richard Schwartz internal family systems when I introduced this to a group of third graders 9 years ago. Are you familiar with IFS?
A little bit.
It's a wonderful way of thinking about ourselves where we each have this kind of core self. It's like our calm, compassionate, courageous. It's just your truest, best self that is the leader of your brain. And then we have these firefighters, these part of our brains that try to this part of our brain that tries to kind of control or perfect. We have these managers that, as you said, our brain's always just trying to help us. It's trying to help us stay safe, but it doesn't always do that in the most helpful way. And I had not heard of IFS when I introduced this to my third graders. But what I like about IFS is this idea that your core self or your wisest self is always really kind with the feeling visitors or thoughts that it encounters. There's no judgment. You understand, all these parts of myself in their own way are trying to help me. But I think saying to a 7-year-old, we all have these brains that can surprise us. A worry will pop up, or a pressure, or a fear. And what's really interesting is that we get to, with our wisest self, our truest part of ourselves, we get to choose what we want to amplify, what we want to quiet. Isn't that cool? Many grown-ups don't realize that they have this kind of internal agency. And I remember Angela first introducing it to my son, actually, when he was 4. I called it his inner voice. I said something like, I know that you want to play this very dangerous game, but the next time you want to play it, listen to that inner voice, that truest, wisest part of yourself. And I think you'll know what to do. Just normalizing, of course, there'll be a part of him that wants to go off and do this, but you have some agency there. And he looked at me like I was nuts. It looked like my words just bounced off of him. And I thought, well, there went nothing. And it's funny, back to the idea of language lurking in kids in ways that surprise you. A few weeks later, we were reading this book about the medieval times, and I had not read the book before. I made the mistake. I hadn't previewed it. And there was a pretty violent part about jousting, like all the terrible things that can happen when knights joust each other, like gruesome splinter wounds. I'm trying to edit it on the fly. But he gets the idea, jousting, dangerous. And he gets really quiet, and he says, if I was a horse in the medieval times, and a knight was poking me with spurs so he could joust and hurt another knight, if I was that horse, I wouldn't move. I would listen to my inner voice and I would just eat grass.
Aww.
And it was one of those moments where all of a sudden, my throat is sort of constricting and my chest is is like unraveling. And I realized what he had said was, when everything seems like it's going one way, right? I actually have another choice. I can listen to this other part of myself, or imagine myself as a medieval pacifist horse, and I can do something else. And I remember thinking, without those 2 words, I don't think he would have come to that conclusion, that the language kind of etched grooves through which his thoughts followed. And I want him, as he, is 15 and everybody around him at a party is partaking in some illegal substance, I want him to remember, there's probably a part of him, a thought or a feeling that wants to join. But he has this inner agency. He has this inner voice, or this wisest self that gets to make a different choice if he wants to. And I think that's the gift of wrapping words around this idea of an inner leader, is that you introduce it to the kiddo young, and then hopefully they hold on to that way of thinking for years to come. And for me, it's been probably the most powerful language nugget I've shared with kids. They really hold on to it.
Yeah, I think so too. And what I like with the older kids, into upper elementary, into middle and high school, is really thinking about what are the different factors that take you away from that. Because like you mentioned, like your highest, wisest self is really kind. It's kind to yourself and kind to others. And when I am not kind, it's usually because I'm hungry. So I get angry. I need to eat. I have no more grace for anybody else until I get that physical need met. I'm really tired. I haven't slept in a while, so I'm cranky. That's another time where my wisest self just takes the back seat because I need to sleep. Sometimes I'm distracted. Like I might be maybe scrolling through my phone and someone's trying to get my attention. I'm like, what? I snap at them, right? That's not my highest, wisest self. If it's snapping, because my highest, wisest self is really kind.
Yep.
And wants to be present with the person. My wisest self wanted to put the phone down and say yes and listen and be totally present. but I was distracted. I was pulled into this other thing. So, really kind of illuminating those things for kids, talking about it for myself, these kinds of things. Again, like you said, modeling it and normalizing it. This is not just you, this is a human experience. We all go through these things. And recognizing that that doesn't make you a bad person. Even, if every time you're in your room, your parent comes in and you snap at them, that doesn't mean that you're a nasty kid. You have a bad attitude. What that means is, were you hungry? Were you tired? Were you distracted? Were you fighting with your friend? Was your mind someplace else? Are
Yeah.
you anxious about the future? Like, there's something that is pulling you away so your highest, wisest self can't show up. Your work, all of our work, is to figure out what those barriers are, to become aware of them, communicate about them, and try to do something about it. And often just the communication piece, I feel, is so powerful, to be able to say, you know what? Can we come back to this in like 10 minutes? I've got to get up and take a break. My head hurts. I've been sitting and thinking for so long. I need to just go get a drink of water and stay out the window. Let's come back. Let's regroup. If I can say that, or a kid can say that, it can be a completely different ball game. So even if you can't handle the feeling, just being able to identify it within yourself when they're younger, and then being able to communicate it about it, and then eventually be able to address it themselves. To me, that's kind of my approach, but I want to hear what your thoughts are.
No, I was actually kind of marveling at you, just listening to you being like, this is a Ross Green mini workshop, because what you just did was like list some lagging skills and some unmet needs that get in the way of making a good choice, which is the whole green approach, which is like, oh, I'm snapping at this person, or I slammed the door, or I refused to pick up my pencil. Instead of asking what is wrong with me, I ask, what about this is hard for me? And that's exactly what you were just doing, basically narrating, oh, this was hard for me. I was hungry. This was hard for me. This thing had happened earlier and I was distracted by it and I couldn't be present with you. And what I love about that language, this is another section in the book, is normalizing, different things are hard for different people. What feels hard for you right now is just such a gift, because then you can actually get somewhere. And often I'll hear teachers say, keep trying, you can do it. And it's funny. I think, of course, we want kids to try, but actually, sometimes when a kid is really struggling, that kid is trying as hard as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And just telling them to try harder is kind of toxic, because it teaches them, I am trying and trying doesn't work. But instead of saying, keep trying, saying different things are hard for different people, what feels hard right now, then you can kind of unlock a solution. Again, back to this idea of separating the hard thing from that child's inherent goodness or wisest self or what have you. And what I love about this with literacy work, Angela, is you just weave it right in. This character is making good choices. What do you think is hard for this character?
Yes.
What is this character's hard thing? And in the back of the book, I have a reading response called like character choice hard thing, because so often, if it's a good book, there's going to be some underlying struggle that is triggering this character to make a really bad choice. And when you can analyze a character that way, again, a lot easier to understand others in a more compassionate way, and also yourself.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. My mind is just racing with possibilities, not thinking about the tie into books and analyzing this through characters, fictional characters. And then in social studies through historical characters. Like, what was hard about this? What made it cause them to make that decision? Like, there's so many different ways you could do this. And I love that how much that distances kids. And you realize, A, it happens to all of us. And B, we're not putting you on the spotlight, that we're analyzing this fictional, whatever, this person who's, not with us anymore. And we can just discuss and talk about it through that lens.
And isn't it so funny that the way we talk about characters is so judgmental? Usually we're like, what are these characters' traits? Cruel,
right?
lazy. Well, okay, we're going to talk about the character that way. You know what I mean? That I feel like characters could use a little more from us. I mean, not all of them. Of course, there'll be archetypes, and we'll talk about that too. But for older kids, like, what was uniquely hard for this character? Right. I like when kids kind of coach characters sometimes. Like, I know you want to do this. I know this thing is hard, but listen to your wisest self. There's just so much you could do with like creative drama or narrative pantomime, guided imagery to help kids practice all this, as you said, in a way that feels safe.
That's a great prompt. Like, how would you coach this character in this moment to listen to their wisest self? Like oh my gosh, I could do a million things with that.
There's a reading response about that at the back of the book too.
Oh, I didn't even see that. Yay. I love it.
In the back, so they're hard to find. So
I love it. Okay. Yeah, that framing of why is this hard for me or why is this hard for you? I can't think of a better way to phrase it. Like that is so accessible, to think about like because kids often say that like it's too hard, and to say like what about this is hard for you or what is making this hard for you right now,
Mhm.
and giving them sort of some examples of things, because some of them can be fixed in that
Mhm.
moment. Oh yeah, I love it.
Really. Yeah, no, I have so many hard things that I'm struggling with like, every
Yeah,
single day, that help me not show up, you know what I mean? Is as you said, as my wise owl. And again, it's also just really helpful for teachers to tuck away and have self-compassion. Like,
yeah,
what is it in this moment that made you behave this way with your co-teacher or with that
right,
parent or with that kid who was pushing every button?
right,
I think all of us just benefit from more self-awareness through a
right.
compassionate lens, through that lens, as you said, as for the most part, our brain is just trying to do what it can to protect us
Yeah.
with the skills and tools it has available.
That's a good example about teachers losing their patience, we'll take a student, for example, and how, you can feel guilty about it afterwards. You can also rationalize it and say,
Yeah.
well, he should have gotten even worse than that, like there's so many different ways you can talk about it. But I love the idea of looking back and thinking, okay, my highest, wisest self would have been patient and calm.
Mhm.
I would have co-regulated with the student.
Mhm.
That's what my wisest self would have done. But I didn't. So why was that hard for me? Well, because I just got a new student that morning with no warning whatsoever. I had this happen, I had this happen, I had this happen, and I was at my wit's end. So, what could I do next time to help myself calm down so that
Yeah.
I don't react like that? Because it doesn't feel good for me to react like that. And then talk to the kid about it
And
and say,
apologize.
yes, that I did not react from the wisest part of myself. I was
Yeah.
impatient because I was stressed out about other things that had nothing to do with you.
Mhm.
And I want to do a better job with that next time.
Totally. And it's funny, that's something I've really been working on and something I've learned from Dr. Ross Green and Dr. Becky Kennedy, just the power of a quick, shame-free apology. That particularly with young kids, when we use a really inappropriate tone with them, which we all have
Mhm.
done, right? When we snap, it's so much scarier for that kid to think, oh, that teacher is kind of wrong, or my parent is wrong. That a kid will always, because you're the one keeping them safe in that moment, if that kid is 5, the kid will always find a way to internalize that blame. And which is so dangerous for so many reasons. One reason being that we like kind of cultivate within them this feeling of, oh, I didn't really like that person's tone, but that's just on me. That's just on me. It must be my fault, right? We kind of gaslight them when we don't apologize to them and we normalize behavior that we don't actually want them to normalize. Whereas saying to the kindergartner, hey, I yelled and I'm sorry about that. What I'm going to work on is counting to 4. Wasn't your fault. I'm gonna work on doing better next time is so powerful for the kid because it teaches them, oh, that part of myself that didn't like that. I'm gonna listen to that part of myself. That wasn't actually my fault. And we just model a completely shame-free apology. And if we want kiddos to grow up and not have all sorts of stuff around, digging their feet in and finding ways, as you said, to rationalize their behavior and blame others, let's just model it when they're really, really young.
Mhm.
Um, I think some teachers feel like they have to be omnipotent and they can't apologize, but I think it's one of our most powerful tools to just normalize a really quick, loving, shame-free apology.
Yeah. And maybe this is a good mental shift for someone listening to this who has felt that way and felt like I can't apologize because I'm going to lose credibility with students. And no matter how many times people tell me, no, no, it gives you more credibility, I just don't feel that way. If you are talking about what happened in your brain and your body, if you talked about what was going on in your nervous system and what
Yeah.
your thought process was, then you become a relatable human. And it's not so much like, oh, I'm the teacher who could just fly off the handle at any time. No, I'm a teacher who, when I get overwhelmed, when there's too many things happening at once, I get overwhelmed and frazzled and I snap. That's
Mhm.
one of my things that I am working to do better at. And you could
Mhm.
know that about me. And as my student, also, I could tell you, one of the things that really overstimulates me is this real example is people calling my name over and over and over
Yeah.
and over again. I get very like, oh my God, what? I'm going to change my name. Like,
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
calling
yeah,
my
yeah,
name. Like,
yeah.
I hate that. And I taught elementary. So I had that happen a lot. And so, I told the kids that's, I didn't have all of this language that I have now to understand what was going on, but I told the kids, like, when a lot of you are trying to get my attention at one time, I get overwhelmed because I want to help everybody. And
Oh,
there's not enough of me to go around to you. So if you can raise your hand and wait till I get to you, it helps me be more calm when I get to you, because I don't feel like there's all these people waiting on me and I don't have to, like, it makes me feel
yeah.
like I have to rush and I get like really upset. And
Mhm.
just like saying that periodically, like, I explain at the beginning of the year, say it again a month or two later, just remind them, hey, remember, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed today because so many people need my help. If you can wait, that will help me stay calm. And then they have that
Yeah.
same language too, because they also feel under pressure. If there's a time test or something, they know what that feels like to be rushed. And then they can say, the timer is stressing me out, like they have that
Mhm.
same kind of language too. And I think it's okay. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too, but I think it's okay for teachers to not only be that vulnerable with students and model, but also to ask for student support. Because so
Yes.
often we are taught to center only the needs of the kids in the classroom, and we forget
Yeah.
the teachers are also human. It's so much
Yeah.
emotional labor in teaching.
Oh
And I
my
think
goodness.
making that more visible for students and being like, this is really hard, by the way, to keep all of this running and to stay calm with everybody. Here's what you can do to help me show up as the best version of myself. I want to do things to help you too. So you tell me what you need. Here's what I need. How can we work together? And that's the basis of a friendship, of a marriage, of a
I
parent-child
know. I
relationship,
know.
right? That's everything. Like, me and my husband are doing this
Totally.
all the time. Like, this is what I need from you right now. No, it's what I actually need. Like, I need
Totally.
this.
It's like it's by sort of positively and in a regulated way navigating your own humanity. You
Yeah.
are teaching them to navigate their own humanity. If you
Yeah.
pretend that you actually don't have humanity because you are just like a perfect, calm angel, Miss Honey, Miss Mary Poppins person or whatever, then that doesn't help them navigate their own humanity. I
Yeah.
will say that no one can hear it and it's not effective done like reactively in the moment in a dysregulated way. I
Mhm.
never got over like the magic of a preview, that if you know that one gets overwhelmed when everybody's calling your name, saying before the writing lesson,
Yes.
did you notice yesterday that I got a little frustrated? I did too. I've learning, we've all been talking about our hard things. My hard thing is staying calm when people are calling my name. And I think I'm going to rely on this strategy today. Do you have any ideas for what you can do in our community to sort of help me with this? Or do you have a suggestion for me? I remember once a kid said something like, "Oh, I had another teacher who wore a hat, and when she was wearing the hat, she knew that like people couldn't walk up to her at that time. Maybe you could try to do that." That if it's introduced almost like before the problem starts, I find that kids don't feel blamed, and then they're much more willing to collaborate and kind of help solve this problem with you, even
Yes.
if it's you reflecting on something that happened yesterday. Whereas saying in the moment, "Hey, you guys, remember?" Da, da, da,"
Right.
it just, no one can hear it when there's any kind of dysregulation. Isn't that funny how like there's just something about the magic of a preview that helps everybody say like, "Oh, I know what I need to do to make good choices right now," as
Yes.
opposed to feeling like you have to reactively fix what has been broken.
Yes. That's such a good tip. Lily, I love this. I want to close us out with the takeaway truth. What is something that you wish every educator understood about the power of how their words shape the environment around them and their relationship with themselves?
Well, I might end with somebody else's words. So many people love that book, All the Light We Cannot See, and I remember one of the final sentences. It's something like, I can't remember. It may be a couple pages before the end. Is the sentence like, "The air "library, every word ever spoken, reverberating on and on." And I think the gift I want to, or rather I don't know if it's a gift, it may not be, but the truth I want to leave with teachers is this idea, like, we offer the language out loud. And maybe like my son, it kind of seems like it bounces off the kids. Maybe you see it appear that year, maybe you don't. But just holding on to this faith that just because you can't measure it, we're also preoccupied with measurement,
Mm.
just because you can't see it does not mean that it will not trigger a really fundamental and beautiful shift. That if you introduce this idea of a wisest self to an 8-year-old, like in 20 years, that 28-year-old may be in a difficult situation and think to herself, "Okay, there is a part of me that wants to do this, but I am going to listen to this wisest, truest part of me and do the right but hard thing when nobody else is. Or I love this idea of a birder mindset. We didn't talk about this idea of like looking through the world, looking for beauty, looking for flashes of joy around you, and we find what we look for. And you introduce that to a 10-year-old, and maybe they're at the DMV years later, and they're like, I'm going to turn on my birder mindset and try to find one thing that makes me laugh today. And their experience there is a little bit better. Or you introduce this idea of feelings are visitors, and or maybe not that one, actually. A better example might be kids do well if they can, right? Parent goodness. And now the kid is a parent and their toddler is driving them insane. And they look at that child and they think, okay, if she could do well, she would do well. And they're able to meet that moment with connection and grace as opposed to with shame. That the teacher who has introduced those words isn't there for those moments, but in a way, it's like the teacher is there. That I really believe the teacher's contribution crosses space and time to be a part of those moments. And so what I hope teachers remember is just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it's not doing beautiful things. And, you offer up the words, then you kind of let go.
Yeah, I love that. It's a return to how teaching is about creating the world that you want to see. And
Yes.
so often we think we're not doing it, particularly within a system that has so many constraints. And coming back to just the power of our language that we use with kids and how that just has a reverberating effect really through the whole planet. It really does, because we're all interconnected.
Oh, what a beautiful place to end. Thank you. Angela, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for having me on. I've learned so much from you.
Thank you, Lily. I appreciate it.